and males.
Well, no. Again, if anything that was consistent, it was 3 guys and a girl, and All-Story Simon was allegedly, and Inez Jackson said that she was there, and that didn't add up, and that led to my confusion. I said, well, how could this be? But then again, I learned that the Cook County Grand Jury was going to take another look into this, look into the investigative practices of Northwestern University, and I said, you know what? I agree with this. Let them do the investigation. Let them sort out the facts, and we could find out once and for all who actually did the murders. And I was all for that. And then they had the investigation, and for some reason they dropped it.
What do you mean?
They didn't go forward with the charging. They nolly processed the armed robbery. My personal view is at the time of the grand jury investigation, the then Mayor Daley was running for mayor against Bobby Rush, and this was a hot political potato, and he didn't want anything to do with it. And Dick Devine, who was his first assistant state's attorney at the time of this incident, he was the state's attorney, and he didn't want anything to do with it. So they said, you know what, let's drop the whole thing.
So at this point, you were starting to come back to the same conclusion you had before, that Porter was guilty.
Well, actually, no. How I came back to the conclusion is when we got sued. We get the lawsuit, and then I learned.
Wait, tell me when you got the lawsuit.
Was right after the grand jury investigation, shortly thereafter, or sometime after.
Were you a part of the grand jury investigation? Did you testify?
No, I never testified, although they called me up there. Tom Gaynor, who was the person in charge of the investigation, interviewed me, but I never got called in front of the jury, no.
Okay, so then what happened? You got served a civil.
I got served a civil complaint lawsuit for the case, which we kind of expected. You know, I kind of expected it, but it was at that point I got my emotions started changing. I got angry.
Why?
Well, I got accused of certain things that I didn't do.
What did you get accused of?
Well, I got accused of being a ringleader of this great conspiracy to frame Anthony Porter. I got accused of not having probable cause for an arrest. I got accused of intimidation of the witnesses. I got accused of some physical abuse, and I didn't do any of this stuff.
Okay, we're talking, some 15 years after the arrest, and you are suddenly accused of all this malfeasance, including torture. Was this the first you'd ever heard of these allegations?
Yes, and that's what got me mad. I got at that point when I learned the accusations made against me, I made a conscious decision to cooperate fully with our defense attorneys, and the defense attorney was Walter Jones. When Walter Jones first contacted me, and I went up there for the first interview, and he laid out the case, and he laid out what I was accused of, I became angry. And I said to Walter, I said, anything you want, I'll do. I didn't do any of this stuff. This is a bunch of bull. These are lies. I said, that wasn't me.
Who do you think was responsible for all these lies?
Well, here, let me put it to you like this. Anthony Porter spent approximately 19 years on death row. And when you're on death row, who are you living with day in and day out? Other prisoners that are in death row. And it seems to me that the same accusations, false accusations that were made against me, were being made by other detectives in the detective division.
Were being made against other detectives.
Against other detectives. And then I started, asking questions and talking to different people, is the allegations were the same. Intimidation, conspiracy, brutality, no probable cause.
What role did you think that the Northwestern University and the
Hold on that. Okay.
what role do you think that the Innocence Project and David Protest had in these allegations?
Well, first of all, I got to go back to their original investigation. Their investigation was flawed. They compromised the facts. They twisted the facts. In my opinion, if anybody did the intimidation, it was Northwestern, and the people that worked for Northwestern intimidated William Taylor into signing an affidavit saying that he didn't witness the murders and that I intimidated him. If you look at their role, if anybody did intimidation, they did, not me. They were the ones that were intimidating.
And why do you think Northwestern and Protest was doing this?
Well, they wanted to abolish the death penalty in Illinois. They wanted the death penalty. They didn't want anybody executed for the death penalty. They were death penalty foes, and they knew that Ryan was on the then Governor Ryan was on the ropes because there was an investigation in his office, and they were hoping that he would pardon everybody and give everybody a commute their sentences.
What was it like for you to have these accusations made against you?
Okay.
What was it like at this point in your life to have these kind of accusations made against you? What did it do to your life?
I can't describe it. You got to understand something. I was brought up in a very strict Catholic household. My mom and dad were very strict Catholics. They believed in the Ten Commandments. They believed in the teachings of the church. And they set an example for me. I personally, I said, wait a minute, I didn't do any of this stuff. And yet, my Catholic upbringing, it was, wait a minute, this isn't me. And that's one of the reasons why I liked working with Dennis. Me and Dennis thought alike. Me and Dennis, that was...
You were talking about how you were brought up.
Well, I was, like I said, I was...
Working with Denny.
Me and Denny was also brought up in a strict Catholic household. And our parents gave us some character, moral values. We weren't into any of that stuff. We had a favorite expression. We threw sand in the air, and where it landed. You got dirty, you got dirty. We were in a bout to me, I couldn't beat a confession out of somebody. I couldn't, that wasn't me. That wasn't Denny. And there were many sleepless nights. I kept on going back to, my God, I said, did Anthony Porter actually commit the murders or didn't he? And I couldn't, if he didn't commit the murders and he was executed, I don't know how I could have lived with that. But then again, when I got involved with Walter Jones in the lawsuit, I started to realize, wait a minute. I stood by our investigation. I stood by what we did and what the other detectives did. And it caused, I'll tell you, it caused a lot of grief and aggravation in my house. My wife, at the time when this was occurring, my wife came down with some very severe health problems. She's got health issues, and it was taking a toll on her. It was taking a toll on my kids, especially my daughter. In fact, my daughter refuses to talk to this one girl who was a friend of her, because the girl was teasing her. Your daddy framed a guy, and your daddy beat a guy, and all that stuff. And it's kind of difficult when your 10-year-old daughter, 12-year-old daughter comes up to you, whatever, how old she was, 12, 13 years old, and say, Dad, did you do it? And I had to look her in the eye, and I said, I said to her, Gina, I said, you know me. I said, that ain't me. That wasn't, I said, that wasn't me. That wasn't, we didn't do those kind of things. And it was tough. I'll tell you what, it was tough. It was really, really tough. But the more I got engaged with Walter Jones, I started coming out of it, and I started reviewing the case report and the court files and some of the documents that were coming out of the Corporation Council. I said, wait a minute, we didn't do anything wrong. And in fact, there was a political decision made to drop the case. And that really got me angered. And I became engaged. I became, I was hurt, but it gave me a lot of determination to prove we didn't do anything wrong, and they were the ones that did something wrong.
But, one thing that I've noticed in the civil case is that at one point the case seemed to go from saying you guys didn't do anything wrong to saying, wait a minute, not only didn't we do anything wrong, but Porter's the murderer.
Right. Well,
tell me about that.
Well, we had when Porter sued us, we had I believe it was a 6-day trial, and the facts and the circumstances were basically the same as the criminal trial of the murder, except for I was the one. Me and Dennis were the ones that were on trial, and there was.
Talking about how it was essentially the same as the criminal.
Well, what happened is they put the unfortunate part about one of the aspects of our trial, the civil trial, was Henry Williams was killed, I believe, in a fire, so he wasn't there to give his version of the account, and the trial judge refused to allow his criminal trial testimony into the record. So that was a little setback for us. But we put on basically all the witnesses that appeared in the criminal trial. And in fact, Walter found, and if I'm not mistaken, Walter found an additional witness who gave the same facts as everybody else did, and we were the allegations came out, and we were able to to prove that we didn't do it. And in fact, after the jury heard all the facts and circumstances, they came back that we did have probable cause to make the arrest. We did have probable cause to bring charges against Anthony Porter, which was a big victory for, that was a big victory for us, but it was also a victory for the city of Chicago, especially the Chicago Police Department's detective division. We were the first case where we charged somebody with a murder, someone else confessed to it, and yet when that person who was charged with murder that got exonerated sued us, the jury came back and said no, they had probable cause.
And what and don't you think the civil trial essentially reconvicted Porter?
Well, if you heard Walter Jones's closing statement, during the closing argument, he says, and I'm going to paraphrase it, he says, "We know who the murderer is." He points to Anthony. He said, "He's sitting in that chair right there," which was a strong indication that we were vindicted, we were cleared, we didn't do anything wrong, and we kind of reinforced the criminal trial that, you know what, he did.
So what throughout this whole time, were you ever seriously approached by any journalist in Chicago to tell your story?
No. The only person that called me was Dorothy Tucker. She called me on the phone, and I gotta laugh. She was eating a cheeseburger, and I can hear her chomping on the cheeseburger, and she called me at home, and the first thing I said to her, I got an unlisted phone number. The first thing I said to her was, "How did you get my phone number?" And she says, "I can't tell you, it's a secret." And I said, "Well, I can't talk to you. You tell me how you got the phone number, and I'll talk to you." And she says, "I can't do it." I said, "The conversation's over," when I hung up.
So what was your assessment of the journalistic coverage, the journalism coverage of this?
Well, there was an article, and I don't remember if it was in the Chicago Sun-Times, Chicago Tribune, or the Reader, but I swear after reading this article, I actually said, "Look at this. Did these reporters write it, or was this written by Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism?" It was so one-sided for Northwestern and the Innocence Project. In fact, it was full of errors about the investigation. But the one point I gotta go back to, 3 and 1. 3 males and 1 female. They don't even go into that. They only interviewed, that we know of, 1 witness, and he recanted his story. And again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. Who was the ones that were doing the intimidation? Us or Northwestern?
So, do you believe L. Story Simon is wrongfully convicted?
Well, yes, I do.
You do what?
I do believe that L. Story Simon is wrongfully convicted, because there were several newspaper articles about Simon and what he accuses Northwestern of doing. See, you got to understand something. He's a street guy. He's from the streets. Somebody comes up to him and offers him a book deal, a movie deal, money. You only spend you only spend a short time in prison. Portis will use his influence to get you out. You'll make all kinds of money. The guy looks and says, "You know what? I can do this. I could do this I could do this for a couple of years."
Do you think those were the tactics that Northwestern and protests were using?
Well,
what do you think their tactics were? Do you think they were on the up and up?
No, they're definitely not on the up and up.
What was not on the up and up?
Well, let's look at how they got this alleged confession from Simon. The investigator goes out there, pretends he's a policeman. He has a video that he shot himself with a colleague of his, and the person, you know, is claiming certain things. He says to Simon, the investigator, he says, hey, you better, you know, your life is in danger. The police are coming to get you, inferring that the police are going to come and lock you up or maybe harm you. So you better confess to us. And then again, not only does he use the scare tactics, and as a police officer, I could never do that.
I could ask you, have you ever heard of a detective ever using these tactics?
You know what? I'll tell you what. I was a detective for 10 years. I've been a private investigator 20 years, 25 years. I investigated cases on the police department. I investigated cases, you know, when I retired. I never heard of that. But in the same token, he got what he wanted.
Well, why do you think it was that Protest was able to pull this case off? How did he get the state's attorney to roll over?
You got to understand something.
What?
We're talking about Northwestern University. We're talking about one of the most storied universities in the United States. You're talking about Northwestern University School of Journalism, law school. How many of the people in Cook County graduated from Northwestern Law School? When you look at that, and then Devine's role in this. When the grand jury investigation came up, I was told by a former assistant state's attorney that one of his exact words were, and I'm going to paraphrase the quote, if you think I'm going to take on Northwestern University School of Law, you got another thought coming.
So, if you could say whatever you wanted to Protest and his colleagues that turned over the Porter case, what would you say to them? And what they put you through?
I don't know. The one thing I would say is, are you proud of yourself? Are you proud of the fact that you subverted Illinois case law? Are you proud of the fact that there were people on death row, convicted murderers, beyond a reasonable doubt, that you freed them from just punishment? Are you proud of the fact that you might have let numerous guilty people free from jail because of your political beliefs, because of your personal beliefs? What about the people that were victims? What about the people's families of the victims? What about all the pain and suffering these people were put through because of your political beliefs, because you didn't like the death penalty? That's what I would tell them.
And what do you think that Protest and his group, what do you think they've done to the image of the Chicago police?
Oh, they ruined it. They ruined the, I'll tell you what, they ruined the detective division, and they ruined several members of the detective division.
How so?
Well, you got to understand something. You got to understand something. I looked at my case, and I said about my case, I got accused of a lot of things I didn't do. There was lies said about me, about this case. And if they lied about me, who else are they lying to? Who else, what other detectives are they lying about?
Do you think they have lied about a lot of cases?
Of course I do. Of course I do.
What cases do you think they've ruined?
I believe it's I think the name of it, Madison Hobley. There's a couple other cases. I don't know the offhand. I remember talking to several people and reading it in the newspaper. And again, I got to go back to, they lied about me. Who else are they lying about?
You think it's possible all their cases are frauds?
I can't answer that. I can't answer that.
All right, let's call it for now.
All right, let's do
Hold on, before you start, I think you should ask me about, okay.
All right, let's do this. Okay.
We talked, Chuck, about what harm protests did in your life, in your career. Can you give us an example of what these allegations did to you?
Well, it hurt me both emotionally and financially. Is after I retired, and when this happened, I was interviewing for a position as an investigator with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. In fact, I went up there for 2 different interviews, and one of the attractions they had was not only was I a homicide investigator, but I was a certified arson investigator, and they didn't have anybody in that unit then that was a certified arson investigator. After the second interview, I was told, you aced it, you're going to be hired. I got a phone call from a former colleague who I worked with in Area 1, who was a supervisor, and he said, Chuck, he says, you're getting hired. He said, really good. And then a few days later, I get another phone call, and it says, sorry, you're not going to get hired. And I said, why? He says, Anthony Porter, you know, with the Anthony Porter case. And he said, that's something. And I wound up, the person who was the head of the unit at the time was a former police lieutenant that I used to work for. I called him up and I said, what's with it? I'm not going to get hired? And he said, and I'm going to quote him. He says, Chuck, you got 2 chances of making it, slim and none. And you better count on none. And I said, really? And he says, really? And that comes straight from Devine.
Well, if you had a chance to say something to Devine and the decisions he made as state's attorney and the role they played on you and the police, what would you say to him?
You proud of yourself? Are you proud of yourself? Are you proud of the fact that you had enough evidence to further on this case? Are you proud of yourself that you let a murderer go because of political considerations? I hope you are.
Okay.
We're good?